right. First and foremost, welcome everybody. I'm really excited about this webinar. You're really excited about everything that is going on with Prosper on right now, and to be bringing this webinar all about budgeting and what is really just foundational skill when it comes to understanding and personal finance. So I believe we have a entry poll here that we can kick off for those in attendance. And the question really is pretty simple. What's your primary reason for wanting to budget better? So what are the reasons why you're here today? And if there's not one listed there, we're going to be really excited to hear from you later on to see what it is that really drew you to learning more about budgeting. And obviously we got a vote here for gaining more control over your budgeting. That's an awesome reason to get started with budgeting. So I'm just really excited for us to bring you some awesome content today. You're not familiar with who we are. We are Prosper On. And quite simply, we're changing the way that people think about money and finances. We're especially excited about today because it kicks off a series of webinars. We're going to cover all things personal finance and personal finance related, bringing in experts like Ben and Zach to talk about the topics of financial literacy that are just super, super important. Really how this is going to flow. So we're going to talk about all things budgeting using a very common budgeting method, zero-based budgeting. It's proven to generate results. It's a really, really awesome foundational skill to have when you're looking at building a budget. And then we're going to hand it over to our experts to talk a little bit about how to actually put these habits into action and then how to tailor it to your specific lifestyle. If at any point you have questions, you have comments for our guests, please use the Q&A feature. Be happy to work those questions and comments into our discussion. Our hope is that this can be kind of a free-flowing discussion. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, throw them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the webinar. My name is Kyle. I am the education and content lead here at Prosper On. I'm really excited to be joined by two incredible people who are at the forefront of all things finance and personal finance. I'll give you a brief overview. We have joined here today Zach Brody, who's the managing partner of Lumiere Financial Group. It's a really awesome group that's managing finances for high net worth individuals. Zach is incredibly passionate about helping people sort of achieve financial success in their definition of financial success. We also have Ben Brosnahan, who is a student at Boston University. He's an incredible advocate for all things personal finance, especially as a college student, bringing a really unique perspective to it. So welcome, guys. And we'll start with Zach. If you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about who you are and why you're here.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Hi, guys. My name is Zach Brody. As Kyle mentioned, I founded a firm called Lumiere Financial about 3 years ago now. We focus on managing assets for high and ultra high net worth clients and the financial planning behind that as well. So certainly a great deal of what we're going to be talking about on the budgeting standpoint is something that we deal with from people who are entry level in the workforce, all the way to people who are making tens of millions of dollars a year. It's equally as important for all stages where people are.
Awesome. And Ben, how about you? Why don't you introduce yourself for those in attendance today?
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Ben. I attend Boston University. I'm a sophomore, and I am really passionate about personal finance. I spend all my time either writing about it, learning about it, or talking to other people about it. And if that translates to anything, it's that I'm really just trying to help other people learn the skills that guide me in my everyday and I think have shown to be really beneficial. So I'm hoping to bring in a bit more of a student perspective and how I use these tools each and every day and show how they can be immediately useful, even if you're a college student making no income or low income or wherever you're at.
Awesome. So once again, so excited to have you guys here talking about just incredibly important topic today, which is budgeting. So the whole message for today is how do you build this budget that you're going to actually stick to and maintain throughout the year? You're using January as this awesome jumping off point to build those really, really awesome habits. We're going to talk about this concept of zero-based budgeting. So what is this thing that is really something that you might have heard before, you might not have heard it before, It's truly like one of the most proven budgeting methods out there. And the premise of it's simple. It's give every cent of your income a purpose. So every dollar that you're bringing in is you're getting allocated to some part of your life that's really important. For instance, that could be things like expenses. So, you want to buy food every month, or, you know, even things like rent or lifestyle choices that you've made. Like, you're part of a sports league, or, you're part of, a hobby group, that kind of thing. Those expenses are important categories and pieces of your life that you want to allocate your income towards. You might also have things like debt, so like credit card payments or student loans. Actually, if you graduate college and the student loan company comes knocking and asks you to pay up, you have that money allocated from your income to cover that payment. You also have things like savings. So maybe you have vacation plans for down the road, or maybe you want to buy a car or buy a house someday. Just something you can actually build into your budget to ensure that as you bring money in, you're tucking some of that away for sort of that rainy day. But that's kind of the high level premise of it. But really, this equation is really guides everything zero based budgeting is. So it's simply income minus your expenses, debt payments, and savings equals zero. So you're starting with that income, subtracting all the different aspects of your life that you need to allocate money towards, so that at the end of each month, that balance is zeros out. But there's a couple of different ways to approach this, and a couple of different notes that are worth noting from the beginning here. You're going to use categories to organize all of your expenses and understand what your priorities actually are, right, in terms of where you want to allocate that income towards. Now, Ben's going to go a little bit deeper into sort of the ins and outs of how do you choose categories that fit your lifestyle. And a lot of our discussion with Zach later on is going to be about how do you tailor your budget to your lifestyle. But really, the core premise of this is, hey, we have all these different things in our life that we have to spend money on each month. Let's actually categorize those and group those together so that we can have a better understanding of what we're spending our money on each month. So in this case, there's probably a good question. What happens if you come in under budget? So what happens if, I create this plan and, it's a great plan, but we actually ended up being a little bit more frugal this month and coming in under budget? That's fantastic. That means that you can use that extra surplus, to fuel your savings and fuel your goals, help accelerate those. There's also the other side of that equation where we create this plan for ourselves and we really hope that we can stick to it. But sometimes that's just not possible. Things happen, life happens, and you might end up with a budget deficit. And that's okay as long as we're planning for it. So we likely have some savings or even some goals that we can pull some funds out of, or some emergency funds to cover that deficit during that given month. And it can help us sort of understand, hey, okay, this is what happened this month. What's the likelihood that that could happen next month? And do I need to make any adjustments to my budget? Rather than just hear me say all these things, let me show you a good example. So let's take Sarah here, for instance. She's a 22-year-old living in Maine, works as a waitress. She just graduated college and she's trying to find that first full-time job. But while she's doing it, she's waiting tables, got hobbies like biking and skiing that she wants to be able to fuel with her budget. And she does have some expenses like for housing, lifestyle choices that she's making, as well as that student loan debt that she's got to pay since graduating. So as you can see here, we have a budget set up where, she starts with her monthly income of $3,500 and she's categorized her expenses she plans on spending during the month, so that total monthly income minus all of those different categories ultimately equals zero. But a couple of things to note here. We dig deeper into these actual amounts, you can see how her lifestyle influences her budget. So, for instance, for lifestyle and entertainment, she wants to make sure that she has enough money each month to go biking or go skiing. Skiing's not a cheap hobby, so she's making sure that she's allocating part of her budget to fuel that hobby. There's also plenty of money devoted to savings. It's probably an important thing that she wants to incorporate into her budget, especially being fresh out of college, that saving for the future is something that's really important to her. So she's making sure that she's allocating a significant portion of her budget towards that. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a bit about sort of some of the logic that goes behind that, but hopefully this gives you a good feel for what this actually looks like in practice. I do actually have a question for you though, because this isn't easy, and that you might have tried to do something like this before and organize a budget, but maybe it didn't work out for you, or maybe you've tried this a couple times, you used it for a month or two, it just didn't stick. So we want to know, what is your biggest challenge with budgeting? So I'm going to open up that poll. So for one of our attendees, they said finding a budget system that works for them. So maybe you tried something sort of back of the napkin math to create a budget. Maybe you tried doing something in Excel. But hopefully this is a really good budget system for you to actually use to organize a budget month to month that you can stick to and that is flexible enough to meet your lifestyle needs. But to talk a little bit more about that, I'm actually going to hand it over to Ben to talk a little bit about that categorization process and how that works so that you can set up this budget and build a system that really works for you. So Ben, hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kyle. I just wanted to start by talking about why budgeting and categorizing your spending is important. And the main thing that I think about when I introduce this topic is that what gets measured gets managed. If you are not thinking about how you want to save towards certain things, or you're not thinking about how you want to set aside some money for yourself after you pay all your bills, then oftentimes you're not actually going to sort of create room to make that happen. So an example of this is, for me, a mistake that I've made in the past is putting money towards dates and money for myself in the same budgeting category, because dates are recreational spending. Spending on myself is recreational spending. But what would happen is I would try and figure out exactly how much money I had to spend on dates. But then if I ever spent money on myself, then I sort of blew my budget, or I would draw down on my checking and it was not sustainable. So categorizing is important because it helps create sustainable growth towards your goals and towards your priorities. So as we can see in the next slide, some simple ways to categorize your spending is to focus on your needs, wants, and savings. This sort of begs into the question a very popular budgeting rule called the 50-30-20 rule, where you put 50% of your income towards your needs, 30% towards your wants, and 20% towards your savings. Now, this is a pretty straightforward rule. It's quite popular, so take it as you will. It's a useful system, but it is mainly more of a foundation. So take this and make it your own. If you have a large set of necessary expenses that you need to cover, if your needs take up 60 to 70% of your income, that's okay. It's better that you prioritize that rather than setting aside money for your needs and then having to pull from your wants and savings later because you didn't set aside enough. Also, if you don't have a lot of necessary expenses, or you want to change this allocation to look a little bit different, do that. What's important is that you make this budget your own and that it builds towards your goals while covering your needs consistently. If it can do that, then whatever system works for you, you should practice. It's meant to eliminate stress rather than create it. If you create these categories, then you should be able to have less of a difficulty organizing your finances. An example of this is, for myself, I split up my income between quite a few different categories. I think about dates. I think about my spending on myself. I think about my needs. I also really want to travel a bit more. So I set aside a little bit of my money every time I get a paycheck towards paying for future trips. And then I'm also thinking about investing, among other things. So having these categories is meant to help you out. But there's a few things that I want to highlight here. It's important that you have a category for your wants and that it is sufficient. Going back to my example with dating, if you don't prioritize spending money on yourself, then in the event that you eventually do, say you go out to a brunch with friends, or you decide that you really want to get that item of clothing, then you're doing yourself a disservice, because eventually that is going to draw down on your checking if you're spending all your money elsewhere. If you say that you're going to spend nothing or a very small amount on yourself, but then you eventually do spend on yourself, which you should, like you should take care of yourself, then if you're not accounting for that, then it's going to hurt you in the long run. So a question that I have, and we'll do a poll about this, is what percentage of your monthly income do you think you currently spend on wants? And there's a few different options here. So I'll give you some time to think about what it is. If you don't know exactly, that's fine. But I know that I often will underestimate. I see, so we've got a few different selections here, 10 to 20% and 20 to 30%. I know that I probably fall into around the 20 to 30% range, although I'm sure I'm underestimating it. So yeah, it's important to try and figure out that and have an idea of how much you're spending on your wants, because then you can integrate that into your budget and plan around it. But some more things that I want to talk about are that your categories should be clearly defined. And so needs are not your Spotify subscription. They're not your Netflix subscription. Your needs are toothpaste. They are making sure you don't smell. They're making sure that you eat. That is what needs look like. Wants is what you really appreciate, like a Spotify or a Netflix subscription, or perhaps going out with friends, but you don't need that to survive. And having very clear lines about what is a want and what is a need will help you to have a more effective budget that is manageable and that you can maintain on the long term. Savings also is sometimes a broad term. So maybe you're saving for books, for college expenses, or you're saving for a deposit for an apartment, like a security deposit. Or maybe like me, you're saving to go on future travel. Sometimes you can split that into your own categories. But what's important here is that you have these categories and that they're clearly defined. Wants, needs, and savings don't need to be your only categories. But as you can see on the chart or on the sort of example budget from Sarah here, we've put together an idea of what wants, needs, and savings would look like based on these different expenses. For you, this might look different from maybe you'd have savings split up into your own categories. Maybe miscellaneous is actually miscellaneous needs that you need to spend on, or maybe giving is just an absolute necessity to you, or it's extremely important. That is okay. Modify it as you will. It's just important that you know exactly what is a need, what is a want, and what is a savings so that you can plan around that. Everyone, including college students, will have their own specific expenses. They'll have their own specific priorities and goals. Making it your own and making it work for you is important. And if your budget doesn't work, then try and try again. I am still refining my budget. This last Christmas, I spent all of my sort of recreational spending on gift money, and then that drew down my savings substantially. So now I'm working on planning around that and saving up for gifts over the course of the year. So just because it doesn't work the first time doesn't mean that you should give up. Keep trying and refining, and it will help. And if it's not working, just don't give up. Figure out what does work and do that. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Ben, you bring up an excellent point that your lifestyle preferences dictate what your budget actually looks like and feels like, and the different percentages that you attribute to things like needs, wants, and savings. And Zach, I think this really ties into sort of your experience working with high net worth clients. You meet with them, you're discussing their preferences, their lifestyle needs, and how to create a financial plan around that. So, when you meet with clients, how do you help them tailor their financial plan to their lifestyle needs?
I think it's, as Ben had pointed out, I think the main thing is tracking it, right? If you're not tracking it, then you're not kind of able to make any type of systematic changes. So, in the financial planning process, the first thing that we do is start by creating a budget. And the way that we create a budget is by using a software program called eMoney, which in essence uses either an API, so somebody will log into their financial institution's website and link that account, and it'll pull all the transactions and create an auto budget. A lot of this stuff is available now through like either Rocket Mortgage or through other companies like Credit Karma for free, or through, used to be Mint, and I think that was acquired by Intuit, which is a company that also owns Credit Karma. But in essence, like Bennett pointed out, if you're not tracking the expenses, there's nothing that you can do to actually change the behavior. So starting out by tracking the expenses, number one, categorizing a budget, figuring out and bifurcating your expenses into two different categories. The first is, what are the absolute needs, right? Shelter. I think Ben had pointed out hygiene. You certainly need to take care of these things. These are not optional. And then there are the categories which we would refer to as discretionary spending. So these are the vacations that you're taking, perhaps gifts you're buying, some of the charities that you're donating to, the things that are really nice to have, but they aren't need to have. So oftentimes people will be in a budgeting crisis because, they haven't even created a budget. They have no idea what's coming in each month from an income statement perspective. So they have no idea what they're really earning. Yeah, they have a gross number at the top of their check, but they really don't know what they're bringing home after tax. People who are just starting their first job to retirees who are budgeting on Social Security. They have no idea. Like, yeah, I know I make, 80,000 a year, but well, what do you take home? I don't know. And they'll usually be able to give you a ballpark. And then they certainly don't know what their expenses are. Well, do you know how much it costs for your insurance? No, I have no idea. Just pay it, right? Everything's on auto pay in a subscription model. Oftentimes people are paying for things that they don't really need. I mean, there's a few different services out there that are just dedicated to canceling all of your like unused subscriptions that a lot of people fall victim to. Certainly that still goes on, right? And people have a Hulu subscription, some have a Netflix subscription, Disney Plus, and ESPN, and it kind of gets a little bit out of control because they have these other subscriptions or they signed up for a free trial for something. They don't realize until the actual free trial date is over or there's a renewal and then they're not able to get credit back. So really tracking the expenses, I certainly recommend, using one of these programs that are going to just auto categorize your budget, give you alerts and tell you what's coming up. And then kind of tangential to that, a little bit outside of the scope of today is also kind of tracking your credit, especially early on. I mentioned Credit Karma. If you don't want Credit Karma to sell your data to advertisers, federal law allows you to get a copy of your credit report once a year for free. So you could do that through Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Building credit early on kind of goes hand in hand with budgeting. So it's another thing that we'll recommend that no matter what the stage of life you're in, just making sure that A, you have a budget, B, you're tracking the expenses, C, you know what the difference between your needs versus your wants, and then D, making sure that your credit is also aligned with that as well.
That's a fantastic point. I especially like that point about just making sure, you're spending money on each month. I remember I was looking back at a bank statement earlier this year, and I was like, "What am I spending? What is this like $17 a month charge in my account?" And my sister had accidentally subscribed to like HBO Max or like one of those like movie services under like my one of my accounts that she shares. And I was like, "You gotta be kidding me. I've been paying for this for a month." So it truly is an important point to just be aware of what money's coming in, what money's going out each month. And one of our previous conversations, Zach, you actually said that budget conversations with clients can be painful sometimes and certainly aren't always like the smoothest conversations to have. So, what are some of these challenges that make this process so painful for some people when it comes to discussing their budget?
Yeah, I think that, we live in a society which is built on credit. I think if certainly now this is the third time I'm mentioning credit, but I live on a society which is built on credit. And certainly if you're here in the Northeast, like I am, it's always like keeping up with the Joneses, right? You see something or your friend gets something and you kind of, you want it, especially when you're in college. It's like, oh, my buddy got the new iPhone or my buddy got the new, iWatch or like, this game just came out. I'm going to get it. So what do? You just kind of buy it. Cutting back is really hard, right? It's just such a difficult conversation just from the standpoint, from a psychological perspective that people by nature usually don't like to be told what to do. And so when you're like telling somebody that you need to cut back, and this happens again at all echelons of income earning and all ages, right? You have a $10 million client who after taxes bringing home 5 million and spending 4.95 of it, right? So there's certainly a difference between being wealthy and being rich. And then you have your college student who is doing their side hustle and trying to earn as much as they possibly can. It's like, oh, they kind of see something that they really want and then they buy it. So having this conversation about like cutting back or just even recognizing, right? If you're budgeting, you're taking the first psychological step into accepting that you have control over this spending and can do something about it, right? After that, you'll make the decision if there's something wrong with your spending or not. But just kind of taking that step to see if there's something wrong, to see if you're kind of doing this like I would call it financial wellness checkup, right? Do you know where your money is going? Um, I think that's a really important step that different people need to take. It's a painful conversation, especially when you get closer to retirement. And there's really only three things you could do if you're off track for retirement. You can either save more, spend less, or retire later. There really is nothing else you can do. And so the conversation often is like, hey, you're really off of your retirement goals. Um, you need to save more money, but in order to save more money, how do you do that? You spend less, right? Or you're earning more, you're changing some type of function, right? There are kind of those three inputs that you have some control over. So I think that's what you, as we were mentioning offline, Kyle, about a painful conversation. It's usually a painful conversation around budgeting.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that, like the term, like the financial like checkup. It's just such an amazing sort of label to put on that. And then to also go back to something you mentioned briefly was that concept of like, you might be that person, with that side hustle that's trying to fund this lifestyle too. So I actually want to kind of shift gears, talk about that a little bit more, because I think we've talked a lot about more the expense side of the budgeting equation in terms of, hey, cutting back on your expenses, being aware of your expenses. But what about the income side too? What are some different ways that, people, especially college students, can maximize their income while in college?
Yeah, I think that there's a few different things. Oftentimes there's scholarships out there, outside scholarships that students have never heard of. Certainly don't fall victim to giving your personal information to like a non-accredited institution, but there are different scholarships that are out there from different organizations that have causes. And oftentimes students are like, I wasn't the best student, or I'm not maybe fitting what a particular cause is, right? There's this particular preconceived notion about scholarships. And that's really not the case. There are so many scholarships out there that people don't know about. Probably one of the most well known is like the Coke Scholarship, which is funded by the Coca-Cola Company. There are many of those, right? So you can just kind of like Google that. And, if you have some downtime, start applying to some of these scholarships. Some of them require essays, some of them do not. So I'd certainly recommend doing. So, would certainly recommend checking out scholarships. Second thing is like a side hustle. When I was in college, I had income from a few different sources. One, I worked at a restaurant, and then two, I tutored students. And that money back then went a long way. So I would think about something that you're passionate about. I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can make money, especially there's a lot of different remote jobs that are out there. And it's not like what it used to be with like campus self-study or the campus, let me go to, take a work study program. So I think that there's a lot of things available. And then, one thing kind of tangential to that is I would say while you're thinking about your side hustle and whatnot, other income producing things, I kind of line up what I'm going to do for an internship early. And, whether that's something in finance or something in media or whatnot, sometimes what you'll be able to do is like, if you have an internship early on and the company likes you, or maybe they're a little bit smaller and have some flexibility, maybe they'll keep you on board and kind of have you do some ad hoc projects to just give you the ability to have that clear pathway and also fill a need, right? If they've gotten the opportunity to get to know you and spend some time with you, and it just kind of maybe the path of least resistance for them in a win-win situation. Um, but it's usually less painful having people earn more money than it is talking about cutting back.
Yeah, it's such an important part of the equation. And I again, I feel like you spent a lot of time talking about the expense side. So great to hear about some of those different ways to give you a little more breathing room on the income side too. I got one more question for you. So, I mean, a huge part of your professional philosophy is helping people attain that financial security, that autonomy. Can you speak to that importance of, you know, taking control of your finances early on in your life to help build these healthy, sustainable financial habits?
Yeah, of course. I think from a financial wellness perspective, um, going back to the budgeting, right? I think Ben did a really good job talking about it in his presentation about creating this budget, and doing what works for you, right? What works for me and what works for Ben and what works for you, Kyle, isn't going to work for like many other people out there. So I think that from a financial wellness perspective, thinking about what's coming in and what's going out, right? From a budgeting perspective, I think that you want to have um, for savings, right? One of the slides over there had actually showed savings as a line item expense, which I really like because you should really be thinking about that. I think another thing is just in general from a wellness perspective, and especially because our audience has to do with a lot of people who are in college, um, trying to figure out a plan on like what your plan A and plan B is from a job perspective, right? So lining up these internships really early on, applying and like thinking about who's going to like write some of these letters of recommendation, forming relationships with these professors that are just kind of really important. At least, in my success, a big part was getting to know the professors and differentiating myself from other students. And I think that that plan certainly works well today. I'm sure, Kyle, you could talk about that more teaching from a teaching perspective. General life advice and general financial wellness, and how would you improve that picture is certainly trying to figure out what's coming in, what's going out, and where are you going, right? What does the future look like? If you're not happy with the lifestyle that you're living right now, um, what are you going to do to change that? And the career that you're going into, right? What is that going to yield effectively? Is this going to match the lifestyle that you want, holding all other constants? Are you going to be able to live the lifestyle you want? Are you going to be able to take the vacations that you want to be able to take? Certainly, if somebody has a passion in music, I'm not telling them to not pursue the passion in music, but perhaps also having a plan B and like thinking about what your options are as you start to transition into the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And you Ben, from the college student's perspective, like are there things that you're doing now to set yourself up for financial success later on too?
Certainly. I mean, what I think of right now, and I tell a lot of my peers to do, is that while as a student, you may not be working or have no job, or if you have a job, if it's on campus, it could be a very small amount that you get every week. If you work on establishing these habits right now, when you land that first job or when you land that second or third job, thinking about putting 15 or 20% of your income towards investing, or knowing, like, outlining what your needs are and then thinking about how you're going to spend the rest of your money, be it on savings, be it on travel, be it on whatever is important to you. If you've already been practicing those habits for the last 4 or 5 years, then it's going to be second nature as opposed to a whole struggle learning process on top of perhaps moving to wherever your job is going to be or figuring out how to fall into your workplace. So right now I budget as though I make so much more money than I do. And I think that'll be extremely beneficial when income becomes more consistent. I invest and I save, and I encourage all of my peers to do the same because while it may not seem super meaningful right now, it really is. And the earlier you get started on this stuff, the more it'll just pay dividends as time goes.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank our guests. I mean, this was an incredible conversation, all things budgeting. I think just the budgeting lessons, but also just the life lessons that both of you guys talked about are just incredible pieces of information for really anyone to have as they're trying to build these healthy financial habits. So once again, I thank you guys so much and thank you to our attendees for jumping on and learning a little bit more about budgeting. And I'm excited to continue to bring you more content all centered around personal finance and really helping you achieve this vision of financial success that you have for yourself. On the screen here, we have a QR code that's going to give you a link to join our monthly newsletter. I'll keep you in touch with everything that we're up to in terms of the upcoming webinars, product launches, any other new content that we're rolling out on a regular basis. For the next week or so, I'm going to be rolling out a financial simulation. So it is an actual 1-year simulation that allows you to practice budgeting and financial decision making and see the impact of those decisions over time, over a 1 year span. So that budgeting simulation should be out within the next week or so. So if you jump on this newsletter, you'll be one of the first to know when it does go live. But otherwise, again, I want to thank our guests for attending and thank our attendees for being here today. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. You can contact us through our website at prosperon.io, as well as, again, once you're tapped into this newsletter, you'll get all of our regular updates. So thank you guys. Get ready, enjoy your night.
Thanks.
Of course. Thank you. Awesome.